it's very special to be here because Heritage has always been the lighthouse across the country for property rights and the principles of our founders. And to be here and to be on this side of the table is quite an honor, and I thank Heritage for that. My friends at Heritage, Rob Gordon, who's been a mentor, and Becky Norton-Dunlop, another mentor, and a number of people in the audience who have been my mentors in the property rights movement for many, many years. To take my cue from my previous panelists, I guess it's a question of what would Ronald Reagan do, and what would Ronald Reagan say if he was in New York State today dealing with the likes of Governor Cuomo. Well, today in the press, as Becky alluded to, Governor Cuomo actually responded to a press release I put out, and I'm the executive director of the American Petroleum Institute's office in New York. And my release basically said, Governor, after 4 years and 7 months of studying this issue about whether high-volume hydraulic fracturing should be allowed in New York, show some leadership and don't respond to polls. And so the governor then said that that Petroleum Council director, Karen Moreau, should spend more time educating the public and not to, invoke disobedience to the governor. I think I'll start right now. And the first thing I would say to the governor is, what Ronald Reagan would say, Governor, is, tear down that wall. The wall exists between Pennsylvania and the southern tier of New York. It is virtually the Berlin Wall. East Berlin is the New York side, West Berlin is the Pennsylvania side. You have two areas that resemble each other almost identically. Very rural, very poor areas that saw a decline in manufacturing over the last 30 plus years. No other real alternatives for economic growth. And what has happened is, for the last 4 years in Pennsylvania, they have been developing the resource known as the Marcellus Shale, using the technology of high-volume hydraulic fracturing, which has been around for over 60 years, with this precision horizontal drilling technology. Again, technology that came as a result of years and years and years of trial and error and research and investment by entrepreneurs in the industry and others. So what we have is Pennsylvania farmers who are seeing their children leave the farms, seeing their children come back because now they have hope. They have a future because finally they can have a farm with money. One of the farmers in Pennsylvania that I talked to, and I did quite a bit of traveling over the last few years in Pennsylvania, investigating on the ground what was happening with the Marcellus development, its impact on communities and individuals. One of the farmers said to me, my father said, I'd like to know what it's like to farm with money. I thought that was a pretty significant statement, because that does, for anyone that really understands production agriculture today, and I come from an agricultural background, our farms, especially in the Northeast, mostly small dairy farms, have been strapped for many years by federal milk pricing policies that control the price of milk, by a rising cost of energy, by a lack of capital, and most significantly, the loss of the next generation to farm the land. No parent, and I happen to be a mother of 5, wants to willingly sentence their child to a life of no opportunity. And that, frankly, had been happening in northern Pennsylvania, and it is happening in the southern tier of New York. in the sense that there's no opportunity there for the next generation. In Pennsylvania, what you see with the development of the Marcellus Shale, $10 billion of private investment. Communities that were broke, like Bradford County, which is in the heart of the development about just south of Broome County, New York. Their county government just paid off its debt. They reduced their county property taxes by half. There's been millions and millions of dollars in signing bonuses and royalties paid to landowners. And those landowners are mostly farmers. And when you travel through that part of northern Pennsylvania, as I have, and interview farmers that have gas wells on their property, you hear a much different story than the media and the New York Times likes to tell about what the lay of the land is with respect to drilling and development. And what was most significant to me, again, was the fact that many are saying now their kids can come back to the farm. I was in Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania last week, touring the operations of Cabot Oil and Gas, and talking to people in the town, in the community, the little villages, where actually they have gas wells under their property. Because with horizontal drilling, the technology allows you to go down about a mile and in a horizontal direction of about a mile. So where the well head itself might be on someone's 3-acre parcel, the actual gas well runs horizontally at a depth of a mile under the property of many others, including the quaint little village of Springville, Pennsylvania, where you had antique shops and other little stores and restaurants that were now thriving because they were getting royalties from gas development, and they were seeing the effects of what this industry has brought with it when it brings in drilling crews and fracking consultants and all of the support industries that go along with natural gas development. So again, in Pennsylvania, tremendous growth. Bradford County, 10% unemployment 2 years ago. Now it's down to 5% unemployment. In Susquehanna County, here's a story for you. Procter & Gamble, factory in Susquehanna County employing 2,000 people, was planning on leaving Susquehanna County a few years ago. Because of the technology that has made all of this development possible, that Procter & Gamble facility has gas wells on it. And those gas wells are actually providing royalties to the manufacturer, the company. They're using it for their own energy source. So talk about a sustainable organization. You know, it's all on site. They have their own energy creation. And they're actually putting together a program where all of their distributors, the fleets that distribute their products, use natural gas for their vehicles. And this is very doable when you have fleets, because you can establish a fueling site at the home base, and you establish a fueling site down the way, and you can actually start converting these fleets, you know, and this is where you're starting to see some real movement is in the CNG, compressed natural gas, conversions of fleets, busing fleets, FedEx, other carriers to natural gas. So all of these things happening in Pennsylvania. In addition, as Diana mentioned, manufacturing renaissance. You had an area where you saw the demise of Bethlehem Steel, you know, U.S. Steel down the tubes more or less. Now what you have is U.S. Steel making a comeback. You have, they're in this tubular steel that manufacturing is used in the drilling and casing process. Not only that, Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, for example, is planning to build an $8 billion cracker plant outside of Pittsburgh, creating anticipated 5,000 jobs just in the construction process. XTO is building a cryogenics facility there, and there are many other manufacturers that are locating in Pennsylvania because of the abundance of low-cost natural gas, and in the case where you have certain types of natural gas can actually be used to make the byproducts for plastics, such as butane and ethane. They come from what they call wet gas. So this is all happening. However, in New York, nothing is happening. And what you have on the ground is a situation where you have poor farmers, generally, property owners. Some of them are retired from farming, but they're still desperately trying to hold on to the family farm, the land that has meant so much to them for so many years and generations. And they are physically looking across that border to all of this growth and prosperity in Pennsylvania. And they have the same resource under their feet, and they have not been allowed to access it because of the policies of now the third governor. And I have to say, when Cuomo first took office in 2010, I was first learning about the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania, and I thought, my God, this guy is so fortunate, because he's going to be the first politician in New York, in modern history, in upstate New York, who will actually be able to do something about the continued spiral downward of the upstate economy. Every politician who talked about it hasn't been able to do anything. And I thought, this is such a no-brainer, because I could see what was happening in Pennsylvania. I could see the minimal environmental impact caused by this type of development, because there's very little surface disturbance in this process. And it's a very temporary sort of development. It's roughly a 2 to 3 month process to develop a well site that can draw the resource under the ground over several square miles. So talk about minimal impact for a large result. What I never anticipated, although I should have given my experience, is the level of resistance he would soon face from the environmental movement in New York State, funded by several key foundations. Kevin mentioned one. That's the Park Foundation out of Ithaca, and the other one is the Clark Foundation out of Cooperstown. Clark is the Singer sewing machine patent family. Park is the Park Media fortune, and Park in particular is run by the daughter of the guy that made the money, and she is an environmental extremist, anti-fossil fuel activist, and almost every program that they invest in is designed to stop energy development, in particular hydraulic fracturing in Pennsylvania, but mostly in New York. And the way they do this, and here's where you bring in the media and you bring in the junk science piece. The way they do this is they give grants. Then they're a foundation, and they give grants to these educational institutions such as Cornell and Ithaca College, and they fund these so-called scientists, people with PhDs. There are several that have really now been traversing the nation to stop every aspect of hydraulic fracturing and natural gas development. For example, they started in New York, and they speak at various events to talk about why this is such a bad thing. Now they're moving into other states, and they're opposing, for example, the mining of sand in Michigan that is used in fracking, and in other states, the resources that go into, the whole process. So they really have branched out. So you have several professors at Cornell that have been elevated to this godlike status by the New York media, which, other than perhaps the New York Post, have allowed them to run unquestioned with their junk science. Even when their own colleagues at the same institution, such as Cornell, challenge them and debunk what they're saying. For some reason, the president of Cornell doesn't come out and do something about it. Now, I find that quite ironic, since Cornell is a land-grant institution which was founded very much to promote agriculture and farming. In particular, I have a great deal of knowledge about this since my daughter Justine was an international agriculture major there, and my sister and brother-in-law, who are full-time farmers, both came out of Cornell. My sister actually says she was able to farm in spite of everything Cornell taught her. But my point is this: they are harming people by this. They are harming the students that they put out to go back to their dairy farms in that area surrounding Cornell. And as Cornell converts its heating system to natural gas and then allows these professors to go out and spew this false information, which has been debunked by MIT and numerous credible scientists, they're damaging people's lives. The environmental movement in New York is really, in my view, ground zero for the nation. I learned a lot about this when I was growing up because I grew up on the Hudson River. And my family owned a large farm right on the river. And we sort of were in the eye of the environmental movement much of the time because across the river from our farm, a number of wealthy second homeowners located out of New York City, and they really didn't want to see anything happening on our side of the river. So over time, the cement plants that surrounded my family that really were the core of industry and core of middle-class employment in our area disappeared because of the regulation and the lawsuits coming out of the Riverkeeper and the NRDC. And so I felt it firsthand, growing up, what they did. And now, in my job, in my role as Executive Director of the Petroleum Council, I see the NRDC again in New York really trying to derail fracking, even though 5 years ago, if you checked their reports and their websites, they were lauding natural gas as a bridge fuel to solar and wind. And same with Sierra Club. But once they figured out that we actually could harvest so much energy and we have so much natural gas and oil available because of this technology, they changed their tune. They have the ear of the governor. It was just, there was an interesting op-ed that came out in the Post this week, and it was entitled more or less, Blue Bloods or Blue Collar. And it appears that Governor Cuomo has chosen blue bloods over blue collars. The wealth behind the NRDC in New York and their modus of operation comes from the Rockefeller family, ironically, who made their money in oil, and the founders of the NRDC, John Adams. Now his son is the head of a sister environmental organization, the Catskill Mountain Keeper. These boards are incestuous in various groups with different names. They all are related in some way, and they have, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., of course, is their superstar, who is the brother-in-law of our governor. So most recently, just when we thought maybe the governor was going to move forward, there were reports that Kennedy had conversations with him and warned him, more or less, that his political future could be, up in the air if he didn't move their way. And unfortunately, in New York, the politics are such that we have a downstate population heavily concentrated in New York City that controls the lives and the land of most of the rest of the state. And our resources in that state, whether it's water or energy, are owned by the rural people. Yet, they are regulated by New York City politics. And you have a terrible situation because you have landowners now who have been fighting for their development rights for many years, farms in foreclosure, an unemployment rate that just came out last week of 11.3%. We have unemployment going up in New York while the rest of the country's going down, the unemployment rate. Broome County, New York, had the highest population loss in the state, and that is where the sweet spot of the Marcellus in New York. And over 2,000 people, 2,500 people left Broome County in 2 years. So, exodus of population, increase in unemployment, no opportunity as a result of the environmental groups that control the political scene in New York, and unfortunately seem to have some control over our governor. And I just want to finish by saying, there's so much to talk about here, but when I was growing up on our family's mushroom farm, back in the 70s, I was like 13 or so, I first had my first brush with what media can do to an industry. And my family was in mushroom farming, and my brothers still are, they're 4th generation. There was a botulism scare, actually, that involved a can of mushrooms in New England, and allegedly someone died because of it. And I remember being a young, tweenie, I guess they call them today, but I remember seeing in the newspaper a big political cartoon of coffins and, mushrooms. So our family was in the fresh mushroom business. We didn't can anything. And so there was certainly never any issue with botulism to start with. But it actually put a lot of mushroom growers out of business. And it was just a misrepresentation of a problem with food. Then, in 1989, when I was involved with marketing my family's products in New York City, we had lots of friends in the New York City farmers markets who were apple growers. And in 1989, you might recall, the Alar scare. This was something that was dreamed up by the NRDC, and they used the media to execute their plan. And 60 Minutes, CBS at the time, ran this piece on how Alar is causing cancer. Alar being a chemical product that was used to help keep apples on the trees. And I remember vividly because the farmer next to us at the farm market in New York City, where we were selling our mushrooms, they were selling apples. They were telling me how much it was affecting their sales. And there were a number of farms in the Hudson Valley, apple farms, which were on the brink anyway, that went out of business because of this. So I saw what they did then. I saw what the NRDC did then, and I feel like I'm seeing it all over again. It's the same playbook with hydraulic fracturing. It just substituted the product, and they're using the media to really drive rural people off of their land. I call it rural cleansing. They would really be happy if there were no people out there, and the Rockefellers and the Adams and those that live in the area of the Catskills, which is right on the edge of where this drilling is happening in Pennsylvania, would be very happy to see all these locals just remove themselves from the landscape and no longer blight the property. And that is really what this is about. NRDC in Illinois has come out sort of in support of fracking, but not in New York. And I strongly believe it has an awful lot to do with the fact that these very influential people, who are certainly influential with the governor, reside very close to the area of development. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much.